Hello everybody, Hooded Cobra Commander 788 here. It's time for another vintage G.I. Joe toy review, and this time we are going to look at the 1984 G.I. Joe Tracker Spirit. And I have to give a big shout out and thank you to Eric Brink, one of my viewers, who helped me complete this figure so I could review it. So thank you very much, Eric. This one's for you. I hope you enjoy it. This is Spirit. He was first sold in 1984. He was also sold in 1985. He was discontinued in 1986, and we did not really have a replacement for Spirit in 1986. In 1989, there was a second version of Spirit that came out with the Slaughter's Marauders sub-team. Spirit's specialty is tracker, which harkens back to the stereotypical Indian tracker, often depicted in old Western movies. Trucks are fresh. 2-3 days old. According to G.I. Joe creator Ron Rudat, Spirit was inspired by World War II code talkers. The code talkers were Native Americans who used their native languages to send coded messages that were unbreakable by the enemy. That's a pretty good and respectful inspiration for Spirit, and that mitigates some of the stereotyping that's going on with this action figure, but I'll talk more about that later. Spirit went by many names. Of course, his code name is Spirit. In the G.I. Joe comic book, he was referred to as Spirit Iron Knife, and Iron Knife is his real last name according to his file card. In Canada, the character was initially called Shaman, but that was later changed to Spirit to match the American version of the character. Spirit is the second Native American character to appear in G.I. Joe. The first was Airborne, released in 1983, the year before Spirit came out, and as you can see from Airborne's character, I mean, he has a slightly darker skin tone, but he doesn't have any of the faux traditional Native American garb that Spirit does. Let's take a look at Spirit's accessories, and he had a lot of accessories, more than your typical G.I. Joe action figure, and let's start with this one. One of the most unique of the accessories is this eagle. The card contents called this just an eagle, but this eagle, as we know from other G.I. Joe media, was named Freedom. This is a very nicely sculpted eagle, lots of great detailing in the feathers, and some white paint apps in various places, and it has these feet that are shaped like a C. They're essentially a clip, and this is a separate piece. It's just glued in there, and unfortunately this breaks off very frequently. You see a lot of eagles with the feet totally gone. The feet on the eagle are the perfect size to clip on the wristband on Spirit's left arm. The history of the name of this eagle as Freedom is a little bit muddled. It's not named on the card contents when you bought Spirit in the stores, and in the G.I. Joe comic book it was portrayed just as a wild eagle, not a companion for Spirit, and he was just called Brother Eagle. So I think the origin of the name Freedom probably comes from the G.I. Joe animated series. It's an apt name. The eagle is often associated with freedom and America, and you know who really believes that the eagle represents freedom and America? John Ashcroft.
Let the eagle soar like she's never soared before, from rocky coast to golden shore. Let the mighty...
That clip gets me every time.
Spirit also came with this belt slash loincloth, and it has sort of a buckle here. You kind of push the wider end of the belt through the loop to fasten it onto the action figure. It's a little bit difficult to get off. This is a very well sculpted belt. It actually looks great. It's got a lot of nice detail on here. It's a green belt with brown pouches, got some excellent detailing on the buckle there, but it has this red loincloth in front and back, and that I just don't get. Why does he need a loincloth? This is another piece of faux traditional Native American garb that they've given Spirit, and he just doesn't need it. It doesn't actually serve any function. This would have been great if it had just been the belt. When you have the belt on, it does somewhat hinder the leg movement. Spirit's main weapon is this auto arrow launcher That's right, he has an auto arrow launcher, and this seems to be a modern update of the old Indian bow and arrow, another stereotypical thing. The accessory itself looks really good. It's got some sculpted on darts here. They look more like darts than arrows, and I guess you could pretend like these are explosive darts that he shoots out, but really this weapon would be inferior to most assault rifles. They could have given him a more standard, realistic military weapon rather than this made-up thing. This is made out of light green plastic, and this light green plastic is pretty notorious for being very easy to break, so you run across a lot of these that have either the barrel tip broken off, or the buttstock broken off, or the grip, or even the scope broken off, so be careful and try to get one that's actually intact. Spirit's final accessory is his backpack, which is referred to as an arrow cassette pack, and you can see why, because it has detailing of these arrows or darts, whatever you want to call them, that match the magazine on the rifle. That is some excellent sculpted detail, and it's really cool that the backpack matches the rifle. So standing on its own, this is a pretty cool accessory. Let's take a look at the articulation of Spirit, and he had the typical articulation of 1984 G.I. Joe action figures. That means he could move his head from left to right. He has long hair, but that does not impede the head movement. He can move his arm up at the shoulder about so far. He could swivel it all the way around. He had a hinge at the elbow, so he could move at the elbow about 90 degrees. He had a swivel at the bicep, so he could swivel his arm all the way around. The figure was held together with a rubber O-ring that looped around the inside. It allowed him to move at the torso a little bit. He could move his legs apart about so far. He could move his leg at the hip about 90 degrees, and he could bend at the knee about 90 degrees. Let's take a look at the sculpt, design, and color of Spirit, starting with his head. And his head, on his head, he has a red headband, and he's kind of Rambo style there. For some reason, headbands in action characters were a big thing in the 80s. I blame Sylvester Stallone. His hair is a separate piece, and it comes off to both sides like this, and it's a slightly softer plastic, so it really doesn't get in the way too much, and you don't have to worry too much about that breaking. One strange thing about Spirit's skin tone, he was given a very light Caucasian skin tone, despite the fact that this is a Native American character, and the other Native American character, Airborne, did have a darker skin tone, so I'm really not sure why that is. Spirit does have long hair, and that may seem a little bit off for a military action figure, but given all the non-regulation uniforms and hair in G.I. Joe, it's really not that surprising. For example, Bazooka really wants to look like Tom Selleck, and he's a huge Patriots fan, so he's going to wear this red shirt out into combat, making himself a huge target, so he apparently is willing to die to support his football team. On Spirit's chest, he has a red undershirt, and there's no sculpting on that undershirt. It's just a paint app, and that makes me think that maybe that originally wasn't supposed to be red. Maybe that was added at the last minute. Maybe that was originally supposed to be just a skin tone. Aesthetically, it looks pretty good. It's a nice additional color splash on the chest. Spirit's overshirt is blue, and that's another unexpected color in a military action figure. He doesn't look like an army guy in a blue shirt, not very camouflaged, but aesthetically it is very nice. It's not a bad color. You do have to look out for this blue plastic. It does tend to yellow, which makes it turn kind of a greenish color, so it's kind of hard to find Spirit action figures that still have fully blue shirts that haven't shown any sign of yellowing with age. He has a sculpted on knife with a leather sheath and fringe. He has a feather and talon, or maybe that's a feather and claw necklace, and paint apps on that. That looks really good. He has a pocket here, and he has these grenades that are blue that match his shirt. He also has a strap here. I don't know if you can see it very well. That's also it's also blue to match his shirt, and these look like details that probably should have been painted. I mean, this figure is amazingly detailed and has lots of paint apps on it, but really those look like they were skipped, and they look like they really need some color there. I would really prefer to see those details painted in. Spirit's arms feature rolled up sleeves, and his right arm has a circle patch with a feather design in it, and the Joe Customs website suggests this is the patch of the 2nd Infantry Division, but it doesn't exactly look like the 2nd Infantry Division patch, so I'm not so sure about that. There's a variant of this patch. It was also printed on smaller than this, and that is the way it appears on my other Spirit. I don't know if you can see that very very well, but the patch itself is smaller. It's the same design. This one is larger, and it even kind of paints over the fold of the sleeve there, so that looks a little bit awkward. On his left arm, he has these sergeant's chevrons, and Spirit is a sergeant, but for some reason they are upside down. On both arms, he has bronze bracelets, a smaller one on his right arm, a larger one on his left arm, and as we established earlier, that one on the left arm fits the eagle pretty well. Both these bracelets were painted with the shiny metallic paint that Hasbro used back then, and that paint rubbed off very easily, especially on this left arm where you were supposed to clip the eagle to it, so that paint got worn off quite frequently. On mine, it's mostly worn off. You can see a little bit of it on the inside, but you see a lot of these Spirit action figures with no paint on this bracelet, and it looks like this. It looks like it's flesh tone with the rest of his arm. Spirit does not have a unique back piece. His back piece originally came from a 1983 Doc. You can see it's the same back piece, just cast in blue plastic instead of this tan color, and this same back piece was also used by Duke. Spirit's waist piece is very plain. There's no sculpted on belt there at all. He has a couple pockets in the back, but otherwise no detailing at all. The belt slash loincloth kind of covers that up when you have the accessory on, so you don't really notice that, but without that accessory, you can see there's really no detailing in the waist piece at all. He's wearing buckskin trousers with fringe on the side, and this is more faux traditional Native American clothing. He looks more like a Hollywood movie Indian in these. On this side, he has a knife with a brown sheath and looks like a bone handle. That's pretty good detailing, actually. His boots are also non-military. He's wearing moccasin-style leather boots. They're brown. It looks like they have fur trim on the top. Let's take a look at Spirit's file card, and the file card was printed on the back of the card on which the figure was packaged. You can see some of the artwork from the front of the card here, and this has a portrait of Spirit. This would have been from the artwork on the front of the card. Some nice artwork there, and he does look more like a Native American there, with more of a Native American skin tone than the actual action figure had. It has his faction as G.I. Joe. It says he's the Tracker, and his code name is Spirit. His file name is Charlie Iron Knife. His primary military specialty is infantry. His secondary military specialty is social services, of all things. I'm not really sure why that is. His birthplace is Taos, New Mexico, and his grade is E4. As far as Spirit's tribal origins, his birthplace in Taos, New Mexico puts him near the Taos Pueblo, which would make him among the Pueblo peoples. This section says, Spirit comes from a family so far below the poverty line that they never realized they were poor, was a hunting guide through high school, served in Southeast Asia, then as a civilian completed his education, returned to the service for reasons inexplicable to anyone but a Native American mystic warrior. Qualified expert M16, M1911A1 auto pistol, Remington sniper rifle. How awesome would it have been if they had given Spirit any of these weapons? He would have been an awesome sniper with a Remington sniper rifle. This bottom section has a quote that says, Charlie is a shaman, a medicine man. He's not a healer or a priest or a witch doctor. There isn't any equivalent in our culture for what he is unless we had shrinks that could actually help people. This quote both sets up a stereotype and takes a shot at psychiatry. I don't know exactly what it is that G.I. Joe had against psychiatry, but it certainly wasn't treated very well in these file cards. A shaman in many cultures is a mystic who has access to the spirit world, which makes Spirit's codename very fitting. Spirit was treated differently in the G.I. Joe cartoon than he was in the comic book. In the G.I. Joe animated series, he was set up as a rival to the Cobra Ninja, Storm Shadow, but of course in the comic book, Storm Shadow's rival was Snake Eyes. Taking a look at Spirit overall, he is a very stereotyped Native American character, and there's no way around that. He is G.I. Joe's Tonto. But this is very typical of the way diversity was treated in the 1980s. Instead of emphasizing an ethnic group's negative stereotypes, they tried to emphasize that group's positive stereotypes. Spirit fits the archetype of the noble savage. He still exists outside of civilization, but he's afforded some kind of respect because he possesses a mysticism that is far beyond the white man's comprehension. For the sake of full disclosure, I am from Oklahoma, and I have ancestry in 3 different Oklahoma tribes.
I was not raised in any tribal culture, but I'm letting you know, just so that you're aware of any possible biases on my part. I don't want to defend the 80s too much, as though we can excuse all of the stereotypes just because it was a simpler time, because there were better representations of Native American characters even in the 80s, and specifically I'm thinking of the animated series Brave Star. The main character in Brave Star had Native American features, even the long hair, even the darker skin tone, but he was not treated as some kind of a mystical thing that comes from outside of society to mystify white people. No, he was the protagonist. He was the hero. He did have the mystical, animalistic powers, but he was still treated as an individual and not like the token Indian guy. Even Brave Star wasn't perfect. It still had the elderly shaman who had the mystical powers, kind of the way Spirit was treated in G.I. Joe. But even that character doesn't seem to strike me as such a terrible stereotype. I think mainly because it was treated respectfully. And I think that's mainly because everybody in Brave Star was treated respectfully. Women, minorities, Native American type characters, aliens, even the bad guys were treated respectfully in Brave Star. Brave Star was an action-adventure show that still tried to teach kids to solve their problems non-violently. It had a very keen sense of justice and fairness, and all of the main characters in that show, they just did the right thing all the time. It was a really weird show. And I loved it. I don't want to get too far off on a tangent here, but my point is, a character like Spirit could have been done better. I'm not quite as bothered by the stereotyping with Spirit as I might otherwise be, and I don't want to give G.I. Joe a pass on stereotyping. These G.I. Joe characters did a lot of stereotyping, really far more than they should have, and I don't believe that's something that should be ignored. I think those are things that should be addressed. At least they were trying to integrate Native Americans into the G.I. Joe lore. Of course, they had already done that a bit with Airborne, and with Airborne they did it in a much less stereotypical way. And if Spirit really was inspired by the World War II code talkers, that's not a bad inspiration. They should be honored and respected. I also like the way they tried to integrate American symbolism into this Native American character by giving him an eagle, the ultimate symbol of America. I would have preferred if they had made Spirit look a little bit more military, although I do understand what they were trying to do here, with the reds and the blues and the greens and the beige and tan. There's a lot of color interest here, and they're nicely balanced. It is very aesthetically pleasing. It's a very nice looking action figure color-wise, but I would have preferred they had made him look a bit more military, like Airborne, even though Airborne has some of this same blue, but Airborne still nonetheless looks more like an army guy than Spirit does. I also think the lack of paint applications on the grenades and the strap on the chest are pretty weak, and it kind of makes it look a little bit cheaper. Those are some missed opportunities there, and I really would have liked to seen those painted in. That would have really strengthened the look of this action figure. Overall, I have some very mixed feelings about Spirit. He is an excellent looking action figure, an interesting character, but I would have liked to seen both the action figure and the character done a little bit differently to make him a little bit less stereotypical. That was my review of the 1984 Spirit and his accessories and his file card. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you're thinking of getting a Spirit action figure, I hope you found it informative. If you liked it, make sure you give it a thumbs up on YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe. I've got a lot of great new G.I. Joe toy reviews coming up. You don't want to miss them, and don't forget to like the Facebook page. You get some updates there that you don't get anywhere else. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you with the next G.I. Joe review video.
It's time to let the mighty eagle soar once more. Let the eagle soar like she's never soared before. From rocky coast to golden shore.